Have you ever had a night that changed your whole life? A conversation so deep that you were never the same after? I have. And it happened inside my taxi on a freezing cold winter night in New York. The passenger who got into the back seat didn't look any different from the others. A worn-out coat, scuffed shoes, a tiredness in his eyes that I knew all too well. But when he started talking, I realized I was in the presence of someone special. It was Jimmy Cliff, the reggae legend. And during that ride to the theater on 42nd Street, he told me a story that sent shivers down my spine. A story about betrayal, ambition, envy, and the most powerful lesson anyone has ever taught me. That you can conquer the whole world, but if you don't find peace within yourself, you haven't conquered anything. I always thought success meant money, fame, recognition. I assumed successful people were automatically happy, but Jimmy showed me the flip side of the coin. He showed me that he had everything the world considers a victory, but he spent decades feeling empty, broken inside, carrying grudges that weighed more than any trophy. And the most shocking part? The solution wasn't where I expected. It wasn't in earning more, in getting revenge on his enemies, or in proving he was right. It was in something most people never have the courage to do: forgive. Forgiving those who betrayed you. Forgiving those who ripped you off. And especially, forgiving yourself. What Jimmy taught me that night is the story you're about to hear now, and I guarantee you'll never see forgiveness the same way again. When Jimmy got into my cab on that cold winter night, Broadway was lit up as usual, full of people running back and forth. He sat in the back seat carefully, as if carrying the weight of several lives on his shoulder. His coat was worn, frayed by time, and his shoes had that shine only people who walk a lot recognize. I closed the door, adjusted the rearview mirror, and asked where he was headed. "To the theater on 42nd Street, he answered with that rough, tired voice. I had no idea who was sitting there with me. The conversation started slowly. He looked out the window, watching the lights flashing on the buildings, the steam coming out of the manholes, the biting cold that made people rush. Then, out of nowhere, he blurted out, "You know, driver, I came a long way to get here." It wasn't just a random phrase. It was one of those sentences where you sense a whole story is being held back. I replied that we all come from somewhere, but he shook his head and said, "Not like me. You have no idea." That's when he started telling me about Jamaica, about the place called St. James, about the poverty that marked his childhood. And every word he spoke seemed to weigh like lead. Jimmy described the house where he grew up, a small shack, thin walls, a dirt floor. 9 children sharing everything: food, clothes, hope. His dad was a farm laborer, waking up before the sun rose and coming back when it was already dark. His hands were full of calluses, his face marked by the harsh Jamaican sun. Jimmy was the 8th child, and early on he realized there wasn't enough room for everyone there. He told me that sometimes he went to sleep hungry, that sometimes he heard his mother quietly crying in the kitchen when she thought no one was watching. That kind of thing marks you forever. If you've ever gone through financial hardship, you know what it's like to look at an empty fridge and have to choose between eating today or saving it for tomorrow. That's a pain that doesn't leave easily. When he was 14 years old, his father made a difficult decision. He called Jimmy one morning and said, "You're going to Kingston, my son. You're going to do something big." Jimmy remembers his father's tone of voice, firm but trembling, as if he was trying to convince himself too. He held the boy's hand, put him on an old, noisy bus, and stood there on the dirt road while the bus pulled away. Jimmy looked back until he lost sight of his father. In that moment, he believed the promise. He believed he was going to get a chance. But years later, when he was already an adult, he discovered the truth. His father had to choose which of the children would have a chance to survive. There wasn't enough food. There was no future for everyone. That revelation nearly destroyed him. Jimmy stopped talking for a few seconds in the taxi, and the silence was heavy. I could see his eyes shining in the rearview mirror, as if he were reliving everything again. He clenched his fists on his lap and took a deep breath. "My father had to choose," he repeated, more to himself than to me. Imagine carrying that. Imagine discovering that your life was the result of an impossible choice, a sacrifice no one should ever have to make. If you're a parent, think about what it would be like to have to decide which kid got food on the table. If you're a child, think about what it would be like to know your siblings were left behind so you could have a chance. That kind of guilt doesn't just go away. It stays there, heavy, suffocating. But what did Jimmy do with that pain? That, I was still about to find out. Kingston was a city unlike anything Jimmy knew. The streets were noisy, full of old cars honking, vendors yelling, music blasting from every corner. He arrived there at 14 years old, penniless, not knowing anyone, just with a guitar strapped to his back and a notebook full of lyrics he'd been writing since childhood. He slept wherever he could, sometimes on a borrowed couch, sometimes right on the street, wrapped in cardboard. But he had a dream so big that hunger couldn't extinguish it. He spent his days walking the city, playing in the squares, trying to get noticed, until one day someone told him about Leslie Kong, a Chinese Jamaican who owned a record store and sometimes recorded local artists. Jimmy mustered up his courage and went to the store. I remember him describing the scene, sweaty hands, heart pounding, the feeling that this moment could change everything. Leslie Kong was behind the counter, counting cash, and didn't even look up when Jimmy walked in. "Mr. Kong," Jimmy called out, his voice trembling. Kong looked up with annoyance, like someone who didn't have time to waste. Jimmy started talking about his songs, about the talent he knew he had, and Kong simply said, "Everyone here thinks they're talented, kid." But Jimmy didn't give up. With tears welling up in his eyes, he pleaded, "Give me a chance, just one. If you don't like it, I'll never come back." Something in that moment touched Kong. Maybe it was the genuine desperation, maybe the persistence. He sighed and said, "All right, let's record one song." The song was called Hurricane Hattie. Jimmy poured his whole soul into that recording. Every note, every word was everything he had to offer. When the song came out, it started playing on Jamaican radios, first quietly, then louder until everyone was singing it. Jimmy walked the streets and heard his own voice coming out of stores, cars, houses. It was a hit. He thought, "This is it. I made it. I changed my life." He waited for the money to come. He waited 1 week, 2, a month, nothing. When he finally went back to Kong's store, the man was there smiling, counting stacks of bills. Jimmy asked about the royalties, about his share, and Kong replied coldly, "What share, kid? You signed the contract. Read it here. All the profit stays with me. You got the recording. That's more than most people get." Jimmy was paralyzed. He had signed those papers without reading them, trusting, believing that Kong was a mentor, someone who wanted to help him. But the truth was cruel. He had been used. Kong knew exactly what he was doing. He took a desperate kid, without formal education, without knowledge of contracts, and legally stole his dreams. If you've ever worked hard on something and watched someone else take the credit or the money, you know the pain that causes. It's a betrayal that cuts deep. It's not just about money. It's about broken trust, about feeling used, disposable. And the worst part? There was nothing Jimmy could do. He didn't have money for a lawyer. He didn't have influence. He just had anger and a suffocating sense of helplessness. That night in the taxi, when Jimmy told this story, his voice was heavy with bitterness even decades later. "I trusted him," he said, looking at nothing. "I thought he cared." Leslie Kong's betrayal marked Jimmy deeply. It was the first time he learned that the music world was a cruel business, where talent wasn't enough if you didn't know how to protect yourself. How many times have you trusted someone who disappointed you? How many times have you believed empty promises? Jimmy learned the hard way that you have to read every line, question every agreement, and protect what is yours. But did that lesson come in time to save him from the next betrayals that were still coming? A few years after Kong's betrayal, when Jimmy had already recorded a few more songs in Jamaica, a new opportunity arose. A man named Chris Blackwell, owner of Island Records, was looking for Jamaican talent to take to England. Blackwell had money, connections, and big promises. He saw Jimmy playing in a bar in Kingston and said, "Kid, you have potential. Come with me to London. I'm going to turn you into an international star." Jimmy hesitated. He still carried the wound from Kong, but the desire to succeed was greater than the fear. In 1965, he boarded a plane for the first time in his life. He looked out the window and saw Jamaica getting smaller down below. He didn't know he was leaving more than just his homeland. He was leaving who he was. London was cold. Not just the weather, but the whole city. Jimmy arrived in the winter with that gray fog that seemed to swallow everything. People walked fast, heads down. No one looked anyone else in the eye. He felt invisible. Blackwell put him in a small apartment, and the recording sessions began. But it soon became clear. Blackwell didn't want Jimmy as he was. He wanted an edited, diluted version, palatable for the European audience. "You need to change your accent," he would say. "You need to sing in a smoother, more international way." Every time Jimmy tried to inject his Jamaican identity into the songs, Blackwell cut it out. "That won't sell here. You have to adapt." And Jimmy, desperate for success, began to obey. Imagine having to hide who you really are just to be accepted. It's like putting on a mask in the morning and pretending to be someone else all day long. At first, it seems bearable, but over time, it starts to hurt. Jimmy spent 4 years in London trying to be someone he wasn't. He recorded songs he didn't like, sang in a way he didn't recognize, smiled in photos pretending to be happy. And the worst part, the songs weren't hits. The European public didn't connect with that fake version of him. It was as if everyone could sense the falseness. He was trapped in a cycle. The more he tried to please, the less it worked. The less it worked, the more Blackwell pressured him. And the more he was pressured, the more Jimmy lost himself. At night, alone in the cold apartment, he would pick up his guitar and play the old songs, the ones he had written in Jamaica, the sound of authentic reggae, the beat that came from his heart. But the next morning, he had to go back to the studio and pretend again. If you've ever worked a job you hate, you know that feeling. Waking up every day with a weight on your chest, faking enthusiasm, selling your soul in small doses. Jimmy told me something I'll never forget. The worst betrayal wasn't Kong's. It was my own. I betrayed who I was for an empty promise. He sold his essence thinking he would gain the world, but he lost himself in the process. And the world? The world gave him nothing in return. Those 4 years in London destroyed Jimmy inside. He gained weight, drank too much, and didn't sleep properly. He looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the person staring back. Blackwell kept promising, just one more record, just one more try. But Jimmy knew he was sinking. The question pounding in his head was, how long do you lose yourself before you can't find yourself anymore? He was at his breaking point. And then, one night that would change everything, the phone rang. It was from Jamaica. It was about his mother. And that call was going to force Jimmy to make the most important decision of his life. The phone rang late at night. Jimmy was lying on the couch in his London apartment, staring at the ceiling, lost in that emptiness that had become routine. The ring echoed through the cold silence of the room. He got up slowly, as if he knew the call didn't bring good news. On the other end of the line, the trembling voice of a neighbor from Jamaica. "Jimmy, it's about your mother. She's very sick. She needs urgent treatment." His heart dropped. His mother, the only person who always believed in him, who prayed every night for her son's victory, was dying. And he was thousands of miles away, trapped in a cold city, in a life that wasn't his. The neighbor explained. It was a heart condition. She needed surgery, but they didn't have money for the private hospital. The public one had a months-long waiting list. Without quick treatment, she wouldn't survive. Jimmy hung up the phone with trembling hands. He looked around the miserable apartment where he lived. He had nothing. The records he recorded hadn't sold. Blackwell paid only the bare minimum for him to survive. He was broke, busted, empty. But it was his mother. If you have a mother, you know there's no greater pain than seeing her suffer and being unable to do anything. It's a helplessness that tears you apart inside. Jimmy picked up the phone again. First, he called Leslie Kong in Jamaica. Kong answered with that same cold voice. "Kong, I need money. My mother is dying." Silence on the other end. Then, "I'm sorry, Jimmy, but business is business. I have nothing to give you." And he hung up. Jimmy stood there, holding the phone. The man who made fortunes from his songs, who stole his dreams, didn't have an ounce of humanity. Then Jimmy called Blackwell. He explained the situation, asked for an advance, anything. Blackwell sighed on the other end. "Jimmy, you already owe more than you've produced. I can't advance you anything else. Business is business." The same phrase. as if his mother's life was just another number on a spreadsheet. That night was the longest night of Jimmy's life. He sat on the cold apartment floor, hugged his knees, and cried. He cried out of anger, helplessness, and guilt. He had left Jamaica promising to change his life, promising to take care of his family, and now he couldn't even save his own mother. All the sacrifice, all the pain, all the loss of identity, and for what? To be there, alone, broke, listening to the icy wind hitting the window. But in that moment of total despair, something changed inside him. He stopped crying, he wiped his face, and he made a decision. Enough with the pretense. Enough trying to be what others want. If he was going down, he was going down as himself. In the following weeks, Jimmy went back to his roots. He started composing songs in authentic reggae, with lyrics that talked about real pain, the struggle, the Jamaica he loved. Blackwell tried to stop him, but Jimmy didn't care anymore. Either you record it my way, or I'm walking out of here. For the first time, he was in control. But 3 weeks after the call, the news arrived. His mother had died, without treatment. Without the money he promised to send. Jimmy would carry that guilt for the rest of his life. But from that pain, something new was born. An iron determination. A commitment never to betray who he was again. And that change was about to take him to the top, even if the price was far too high. In 1969, Jimmy launched the song that would change everything. Wonderful World, Beautiful People. He had composed it at the height of his pain right after his mother's death, mixing sadness with a message of hope. It was pure, authentic reggae, without masks. The beat had that Jamaican cadence he had hidden for years, and the lyrics spoke directly to the hearts of those who suffered. When the song started playing on European radios, something unexpected happened. People loved it. Not the fake version Blackwell wanted, but the real Jimmy. The song climbed the charts in England, Germany, France. Suddenly, Jimmy Cliff was a household name around the world. He had finally made it. After years of humiliation, poverty, and losing himself, he was at the top. Radios played his music nonstop. Newspapers wrote articles about him. Fans asked for autographs in the streets. Jimmy should have been happy, right? But life has a cruel way of mixing victory with poison. First, Leslie Kong reappeared. He knocked on the door of Jimmy's apartment in London with a big smile and papers in hand. "Jimmy, my boy, I'm so proud. I'm here to collect my share." Jimmy stared at him in disbelief. "Your share? You did nothing for this song." Kong laughed, that cold way of his. "But I discovered you, remember? The old contracts are still valid. You owe me a percentage of everything." And he showed the papers that Jimmy had signed years ago, blinded by hope. Blackwell also started tightening the screws. Now that Jimmy was profitable, he wanted to control every move. Tours, interviews, recordings, everything had to go through him. Jimmy barely had time to breathe. It was as if success had become a different kind of prison, only with golden chains. But the hardest blow was still to come. One night, Jimmy returned home and found his wife sitting in the living room with 2 suitcases beside her. Her eyes were red, but her voice was firm. "I'm leaving, Jimmy." He froze. "Why? Now that things are finally looking up?" She shook her head. "Things are looking up for you. But I spent years waiting, suffering, enduring poverty while you chased a dream. Now that the dream has arrived, I realize you love the music more than you love me." Jimmy tried to argue, held her hands, promised to change, but she had already decided. "I met someone else, a manager. He can provide stability for me and the kids. You can only provide uncertainty, the kids." 2 young children Jimmy had barely watched grow up, always traveling, always recording, always chasing the next gig. She grabbed the suitcases and called the children. Jimmy stood there at the door, watching his family walk away. The boys looked back, confused, and he tried to smile so as not to scare them. But inside, he was shattered. He had conquered the world, but he lost what truly mattered. If you've ever sacrificed relationships for your career, you know that pain. That feeling of looking around and realizing you're alone at the top. That night, Jimmy drank alone in the empty apartment. The song, "Wonderful World, Beautiful People" played on the radio, ironically mocking him. Wonderful world, beautiful people. He had money now, he had fame, he had success. But he was emptier than when he had nothing. Kong was robbing him again. Blackwell was controlling everything. His family was gone. And he was there, alone, holding a glass of whiskey, trying to figure out where everything went wrong. The answer was simple, yet painful. He had gained the world and lost his soul. And the worst part is, it wasn't over yet. More betrayals, more pain, more illusions were still to come. But also, an opportunity to tell his story in a way no one expected. In 1972, a Jamaican director named Perry Henzell approached Jimmy with an unusual proposal. He wanted to make a movie about the Jamaican music industry, about how it exploited poor artists, and he wanted Jimmy as the lead. The script told the story of a young singer who arrives in Kingston full of dreams, is betrayed by a greedy producer, and ends up becoming an outlaw. When Jimmy read the script, he felt a shiver. It was his story. Every scene, every betrayal, every disillusionment. It was as if someone had gotten inside his head and turned his pain into paper. He accepted immediately, not just for the opportunity to act, but because he needed to tell that story. He needed the world to know what happened behind the scenes of success. Filming began in Jamaica. Jimmy returned to Kingston for the first time in years. The streets had changed. They were more violent, more chaotic. But the smell of the earth, the sound of the sea, the beat of reggae on the street corners, all of that still felt like home. During the day, he shot the scene. At night, he stayed awake, reliving everything he had been through. The character was called Ivan, but it was Jimmy. Every line Ivan spoke was a line Jimmy wished he had said to Kong, to Blackwell, to everyone who exploited him. He poured all his accumulated anger into those scenes. The other actors were impressed by his intensity. It wasn't acting, it was pure life experience. There was one scene in particular that almost destroyed Jimmy. It was the scene where Ivan discovers that the producer stole all the money from his songs. Ivan confronts the producer, screams, pleads for justice, but the producer just laughs in his face. When they recorded it, Jimmy got so deep into the character that he had a nervous breakdown. He started genuinely screaming. Not the lines from the script, but words from his own soul. "You stole my life! You destroyed me!" The crew fell silent. Perry Henzell yelled, "Cut!" But Jimmy remained there, trembling, crying, collapsing. It took nearly an hour to calm him down. That scene stayed in the movie, raw, real, painful. It was art imitating life brutally. Anyone who watched it would feel every second of that pain. When The Harder They Come premiered, it became a worldwide phenomenon. It wasn't just a movie, it was a manifesto. It exposed the rotten core of the music industry, the exploitation of artists, the structural violence of poverty. Jimmy became an icon, not just as a musician, but as an actor, a symbol of resistance. The movie traveled to festivals in Europe, the United States, won awards, and became a cult classic. The songs on the soundtrack, including several by Jimmy, sold millions. It was the peak. He had succeeded in exposing the truth. But then came the final blow. Jimmy looked at the contract he had signed before filming. Fixed payment. No participation in the profits. Again, he had made the movie of his life, exposed his soul, and he wouldn't see a single cent beyond the initial fee. Jimmy sat in the dressing room after the London premiere, his head in his hand. People were clapping outside, shouting his name, calling him a genius. But he was empty. He had told his story, but he was still being exploited. It was like a curse, as if no matter how hard he fought, someone would always be profiting at his expense. If you've ever worked on something grand and watched others take all the credit, you know that frustration. It's a feeling of injustice that never goes away. But Jimmy was about to discover that the greatest battle wasn't against Kong or Blackwell. It was against something much more dangerous. The envy that was beginning to grow inside him as he watched another Jamaican artist shine brighter than he ever had. Bob Marley was everywhere. In the 70s, while Jimmy struggled to maintain his relevance, Marley exploded like a hurricane. No Woman, No Cry, Redemption Song, One Love. Every song was an anthem. Every show was historic. Marley had something Jimmy never achieved: total control over his career. He had his own record label, his own terms, his family by his side, and the world loved him in a way Jimmy always dreamed of being loved. In the taxi, Jimmy confessed something that must have been difficult. I felt jealous, a jealousy that ate me alive. It wasn't easy to admit, but it was true. He saw Marley on posters, in magazines, in the news, and a part of him wished that belonged to him. Envy is a silent poison. It starts small, like a mosquito bite. You notice someone else's success and think, why not me? But if you feed that thought, it grows. It turns into resentment. It turns into bitterness. Jimmy started avoiding events where Marley would be. When someone mentioned Bob's name in front of him, Jimmy changed the subject. He knew it was wrong. He knew Marley wasn't to blame for anything, but he couldn't control it. It's like when you see a colleague promoted while you remain in the same spot. Reason tells you everyone has their own journey, but your chest tightens. And Jimmy was letting that tightness dominate his life. The worst part was that Marley was always respectful of Jimmy. In interviews, Marley would say, "Jimmy Cliff opened doors for all of us. He was the first to bring reggae to the world." But Jimmy, consumed by envy, interpreted this as pity, as if Marley was throwing him crumbs of recognition. He stopped listening to his own songs. He stopped composing with the same passion. All he did was compare himself to Marley and feel like he was losing. If you've ever fallen into that trap, you know how much it paralyzes you. Comparison kills creativity. It kills joy. It turns every victory of the other person into a defeat for you. And Jimmy was drowning in it. Then, in 1978, something happened that would change everything. Jimmy was getting ready for a show in Kingston when there was a knock on the dressing room door. He opened it, and there was Bob Marley. Jimmy tensed up, unsure what to expect. Marley walked in slowly with his characteristic calm demeanor and looked into Jimmy's eyes. "Brother," Marley said, his voice soft yet firm, "you paved the way for all of us. Never forget that." And before Jimmy could answer, Marley hugged him, a tight hug, the kind that doesn't lie, and he started to cry. Right there on Jimmy's shoulder, Bob Marley cried, not out of sadness, but out of genuine gratitude. Jimmy was frozen. He didn't expect that. He didn't expect the man he envied so much to see him as a hero. Marley pulled away, wiped his tears, and said, "Without you, I wouldn't be here. You proved it was possible." And he left, just like that. Jimmy was left alone in the dressing room, trembling. In that moment, something broke inside him. The envy didn't instantly vanish, but it was the beginning. He realized he had spent years hating someone who only had love for him, that he had poisoned himself while Marley walked in peace. If you hold a grudge against someone who doesn't even know you exist, who is suffering? Only you. Jimmy understood that in that hug, and for the first time in years he felt something close to peace. But true peace was still distant. He would need to travel to the other side of the world to find it. Jimmy was destroyed inside. The envy of Marley had lessened, but the accumulated guilt and bitterness of a lifetime were still there. The death of the mother he couldn't save, the family that left him, the repeated betrayals, the money that never arrived, all of it weighed like lead on his shoulders. In 1976, he made a drastic decision. He was going to travel to Africa. Not for shows, not for recording. He was searching for answers. He wanted to understand the meaning of so much pain, so much suffering. He thought maybe by returning to his African roots, he would find peace. He went to Nigeria, then to Ethiopia, places where reggae and Jamaican culture had deep connections to the past. In Africa, Jimmy met people who practiced Islam. They spoke about submission to God, about accepting fate, about inner peace through faith. Jimmy, desperate for anything that would alleviate the pain, dived head first. He studied the Quran, participated in prayers, and followed the rituals. In a ceremony in Lagos, he officially converted and adopted the name El Hajj Naim Bachir. He thought this would be salvation, that he had finally found the way. People around him congratulated him, saying he was on the right path. But inside, Jimmy remained empty. It was like wearing a suit that doesn't fit. It might look nice, but it feels uncomfortable all the time. He passed months trying to convince himself that he was at peace. He woke up early for prayers, fasted, and read the sacred texts. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw his mother's face, heard his ex-wife's voice, and remembered the betrayals. Religion wasn't healing anything. It was just covering the wounds with a thin cloth. Jimmy confessed in the taxi, "I wasn't looking for God. I was running from myself." And that's a huge difference. Many people seek spirituality as an escape, not as a genuine search. They go to the monastery, the retreat, the church, but they carry all their problems inside their backpack. And the backpack remains heavy, no matter where you go. Years later, back in Jamaica, Jimmy abandoned the conversion. He publicly admitted, "Islam did not satisfy my soul." It wasn't a criticism of the religion, but an honest recognition that he had looked in the wrong place. Peace wasn't in external rituals. It wasn't in traveling to distant places. It wasn't in changing his name or his faith. It was in something much more difficult and much simpler: forgiveness. Forgiving those who hurt him. Forgiving himself for the bad choices. Forgiving life for not being what he imagined. But Jimmy hadn't gotten there yet. He still carried hatred, especially for Leslie Kong, the man he considered the symbol of all betrayals. Jimmy spent another decade bitter, isolated, performing shows, but with no sparkle in his eyes. People saw a famous artist, but he felt like a ghost. Until one day, decades after Kong's death, a lawyer knocked on his door with an old, dusty box. "Mr. Cliff," she said, "this belonged to Leslie Kong. He left instructions for it to be delivered to you should anything happen to him." Jimmy looked at the box, confused. What could Kong have left for him? More exploitative contracts? More posthumous humiliation? He opened the box with trembling hand, and what he found inside would change his life forever. Inside the box were letters, several of them, handwritten in the shaky script of someone who was sick. Jimmy carefully picked up the first one, as if it might explode in his hand. It was dated 1970, a year before Kong's death. "Dear Jimmy," the letter began, "I write this because I know I don't have much time. The doctors say it's my heart. Ironic, isn't it, considering I never used mine much." Jimmy slowly sat down, his breathing heavy. Kong continued, "I know what I did to you. I know I stole your dreams, that I exploited your naivete, and I know you hate me. You have every right." Jimmy's hands began to shake. The letter went on. "I could lie and say it was just business, that it wasn't personal, but that would be another betrayal. The truth is, I saw in you what I never had, pure talent, true passion, and instead of helping, I used it. I emptied you to fill myself up." Jimmy stopped reading for a moment. Tears started streaming down his face. They weren't tears of anger. They were tears of something he hadn't expected: recognition. Kong was admitting it. He was taking the blame. No excuses, no justifications, just the raw truth. And somehow, that hurt more than the betrayal itself, because it was impossible to keep hating someone who hated himself first. Kong revealed more. "I saved the money that was yours. Not all of it. I spent a lot, but a considerable portion. I put it into a bank account in your name. I wanted to give it back personally. I wanted to look you in the eyes and ask for forgiveness. But life didn't give me time." Jimmy dropped the letter and desperately searched the box. There was a thick envelope with bank documents, an account that had been in his name for decades, with accumulated interest, investments that someone had wisely made. The amount was substantial. Kong had saved it. He really had saved it. Jimmy covered his face with his hands and sobbed loudly, not because of the money, but because of the genuine repentance that this represented. The last letter was shorter, more desperate. "Jimmy, I betrayed the kid who trusted me. I looked into his hopeful eyes and chose profit. May God forgive me, because I will never forgive myself. If you are reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I only ask that you don't let the hatred for me destroy the rest of your life. You are too great for that. You always were. I was just too cowardly to recognize it. Leslie Kong." Jimmy stayed there on the living room floor, surrounded by letters, crying like he hadn't cried since childhood, crying for the injustice, for the pain, but also for the liberation. He realized something both devastating and freeing at the same time. He had spent decades hating a man who already hated himself. Kong lived his final years tormented by guilt. He died without peace, and Jimmy had wasted years of his own life fueling a hatred for someone who was already gone, physically and spiritually. How many times do we do that? We hold grudges against people who may have already repented, already changed, already died. And who suffers because of it? Only us. Kong felt nothing anymore. He was dead, but Jimmy had carried that weight like a stone tied around his neck. In that moment, he decided to let go of the stone, not because Kong deserved forgiveness, but because he, Jimmy, deserved peace, and that discovery was about to reach me in that taxi in New York on a cold night I would never forget. The taxi was stopped at the red light on 42nd Street when Jimmy turned to me and said, "Driver, do you know what it's like to have everything and nothing at the same time?" I looked in the rearview mirror. His eyes shone with a heavy wisdom, the kind that only comes from someone who went to hell and came back. He continued, "I got into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I won Grammys. I sold millions of records. My face is on posters all over the world. But do you know when I finally felt rich? When I forgave?" The light turned green, but I drove slowly, wanting to absorb every word. This wasn't a common conversation. It was a life lesson being delivered for free. Jimmy explained that for decades he chased recognition. He wanted to prove to the world that he was important, that he was worth something. Every award was an attempt to fill the emptiness. Every sold-out show was a search for validation, but nothing was ever enough. You go up on stage, 50,000 people screaming your name, and when you step down, you go back to the hotel room alone and realize you're still empty. He forgave Kong because of the letters. He forgave Blackwell for trying to mold him. He forgave his ex-wife for leaving. But the most difficult thing was forgiving himself, for not saving his mother, for abandoning his children, for selling his essence during those years in London. "Self-forgiveness is the hardest," he said, "because you can't run away from yourself." He talked about how forgiveness isn't an event, but a process. He didn't wake up one day enlightened and free from everything. It happened gradually. There were days the anger came back, days when he wanted to blame everyone again, but he kept choosing to let go, choosing to release, choosing peace instead of being right. People think forgiving is saying, "It's okay, you didn't hurt me," but that's not it. Forgiving is saying, "You hurt me, and I choose not to let that destroy me." If you are trapped in bitterness, understand this. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's not pretending the pain didn't exist. It's refusing to let the pain define the rest of your life. It's letting go of the rope in the tug of war, even if the other side is still pulling. We arrived at the theater. Jimmy looked out the window, saw the lights, the movement, the people waiting. In an hour he would be on stage, being applauded, being idolized. But he turned to me and said, "Music gave me fame, but forgiveness gave me peace, and peace is worth more than all the gold in the world." He opened the door, got out slowly, and straightened his coat. I thought the conversation was over, but then he came back. He tapped on the window. I rolled down the glass, and he handed me an envelope. "Thanks for listening. Keep driving, keep living, keep forgiving." Before I could answer, he was already entering the theater, swallowed by the crowd of fans. When I opened the envelope, there were $500 in bills and a note. "Keep driving, keep living, keep forgiving." I stayed there, stopped, holding that money. But the real gift wasn't that. It was the story. It was the lesson. How many rides had I given in my life? Thousands. But that night changed my perspective on everything. I realized I was carrying grudges too. A brother who owed me money, a former boss who fired me unfairly, an ex-girlfriend who cheated on me. I held on to everything, feeding the resentment as if it were a trophy. And for what? To feel morally superior? To be right? Jimmy showed me that being right doesn't make you happy. Having peace does. And what about you? What are you holding on to that you need to let go of? What invisible chain is keeping you from flying? Jimmy Cliff passed away in November of 2025 at 81 years old, leaving a legacy that goes far beyond music. But do you know what the biggest lesson he left me that night was? It wasn't about how to achieve success. It was about how to find peace after getting everything and still feeling empty. How many betrayals are you carrying? How many resentments are stealing your energy, your joy, your ability to live fully? You might be right about everything that was done to you. You might have every justification in the world to hold a grudge. But ask yourself, where is that leading you? Is it making you happy? Or is it just keeping you trapped in an invisible prison where you are both the jailer and the prisoner at the same time? Jimmy's life proved that success without inner peace is an illusion. It's a golden prison where you have everything but the one thing that truly matters: emotional freedom. So I challenge you now. Who do you need to forgive? It might be someone who betrayed you, a family member who disappointed you, an ex-partner who hurt you, or perhaps, the most difficult of all, yourself. Start today. Don't wait for the person to apologize. Don't wait for them to deserve it. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Forgive because you deserve peace. Forgive because your life is too valuable to be wasted fueling hatred. If this story touched your heart, if in some way you saw yourself in Jimmy's journey, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. There are many more transformative stories coming, and you can't miss them. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, and always remember, you can conquer the whole world, but if you don't conquer the peace within yourself, you haven't conquered anything.